The views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of this station, JVC Broadcasting Management, or its sponsors.
Welcome to Crime and Justice Radio, where we talk all things crime, justice, mayhem, and the courts with expert insiders and legal outcasts. I'm Aida Leisenring, and I'm here with Bruce Barket. Good evening, Bruce.
Good evening, Aida. How are you this evening?
I'm very well. How was your weekend?
Sunny and 90. My kind of weather. It can't get hot enough, can't get humid enough for me. I loved it.
I went fly fishing this weekend with three generations: my soon-to-be 91-year-old grandmother, my father, my brother. I know this doesn't relate to Crime and Justice Radio, but I did murder some trout. So,
good for you.
And my father is always looking out for poachers, but that's not an area of law we really practice.
Yeah, I spent the three-sport weekend: golf, tennis, and swimming. So it was a lot of fun.
Wonderful. We have an awesome show. Bruce, why don't you tell people who we've got on today?
We have Ron Kuby is going to be our guest shortly. Excellent lawyer, great guy, funny, smart, probably the most famous civil rights lawyer in New York City these days. Used to work for William Kunstler back when Bill was fighting the good fight for those experiencing injustice. And he is super smart and super funny. So I'm really looking forward to chatting with him.
And I didn't know this, but I should have. I guess I didn't put two and two together. There's a reference to him in The Big Lebowski where Jeff Bridges' character, the dude, is contemplating attorneys, and he contemplates getting Ron Kuby as one of his lawyers.
There's several movie references. Among his legal skills, Ron was also on the radio for a number of years with Curtis Lewa at another station.
So we're very lucky to have him, and we're going to also talk about some kind of hot topics today, some cases. One is Jasmine Harden, who is a Canadian socialite who's currently being charged with murder in Belize. We're also going to talk about Anna Siga Nicolazzi, which she's getting more news hits these days. She's a former prosecutor who...
Two questions.
Yes.
One, what's a socialite?
Gun to your head. Give me an answer. I don't believe you don't know that.
What's a socialite? Like a rich person that doesn't have to work?
A woman married to a billionaire that it does work. I think a lot of socialites, their life is full of work. They go to set up charity organizations. They go to cocktail parties. But anyway,
can I apply?
Sure. Go marry a billionaire. But she's charged currently with murder, and she's detained in Belize without bail, even though she's charged with negligent homicide for shooting her really good friend who is the police superintendent.
Weird case. And she's not charged with murder, right? She's charged with negligent homicide at this point, or negligent manslaughter?
So she technically only faces up to 5 years or as little as a fine. But she could be charged potentially with murder as they continue to investigate the case.
Odd circumstances, as I understand it.
Well,
tell us about it a little bit.
So she was apparently intoxicated. She had come back from some event. She's married to Andrew Ashcroft, who is the son of British billionaire Lord Michael Ashcroft. She has two young kids, and she was recently out at some gala, and she had been harassed aggressively by a man, and her friend, who is the police superintendent in Belize, had suggested to her that she protect herself with a gun. So he was giving her gun lessons. And on this night in question, she had gotten together with him. Apparently, she asked her husband if he wanted to come along, and he said, "I'm tired, you two go ahead." They drank whiskey, wine, a ton of alcohol. They walked out onto the pier. And she claims, this is her alleged confession, that Henry Jimmo, who's the superintendent, who, by the way, left behind, I think, 4 or 5 kids, he made me unload the bullets from his gun and reload them time and time again to practice for when I eventually got my gun license and my own gun. We're sitting on the pier, and I start loading and unloading his gun again. The last time I did it, he took the bullets as I was unloading and placed them on the left side of him. I then put the gun with the magazine clipped inside it beside me to the right. She then says that she picked up the pistol, which was a Glock, and tried to eject the magazine clip. He had said, "All right, give me the gun back," but, eject the magazine. but it was stuck and she struggled and trying to get the magazine out when the gun suddenly went off. She said she had no idea there was a bullet in the chamber. He collapsed on top of her. She panicked and pushed him off because he's a very large man. And she is this, Grace Kelly lookalike, 32-year-old petite woman. And he fell off the dock and into the water. She apparently lost it and screamed for help. But what I think is stunning is that she's been denied bail, and that in Belize, it can take up to 4 years for people to get a trial. So she's coming up on an appeal, I think, of the bail hearing. You're giving me a funny look, Bruce.
There's a lot about this story that doesn't make sense. Leaving aside the obvious that gun training on a dock at 3:00 in the morning after you've been drinking,
sitting on the dock of the bay,
it's not typical.
Practicing my guns.
Hopefully, even in Belize, that's not typical. And the practicing loading and unloading a Glock is an odd thing to practice because you wouldn't need to. What you'd practice is shooting. The loading is relatively straightforward. You shove the bullets into a magazine, put the magazine in the gun, and you're largely good to go. But I can see how if you did that over and over again, a round could be chambered, and you drop the magazine, take the bullets out, put them back in, put the magazine in again, and repeat that, not realizing that at one point a bullet was chambered. Because the way the Glock and most semi-automatic handguns work is when the slide is back and the gun is empty, when you put the magazine in, you bang it in, and the slide goes forward, that chambers around. Unlike what you see on TV that you have to rack it after you put the magazine in, that's not correct. So if you drop the magazine after that and unload the bullets from the magazine and put them back in and go through this process, they're still around in the chamber. The thing that doesn't make sense to me is
he was shot in the
back
of his
behind his
right
ear.
Which makes sense to me. If you're like grabbing your stuff, all right, let's go, grab the gun, give it to me. And he could be reaching for his hotel room key or whatnot. I mean, there is salacious gossip about the case, and people are asking what really happened. And I think this happens too with women, and attractive, rich women is there's this idea that they can't be telling the truth. Something must have gone wrong. They're showing pictures of her at target practice to imply that she actually had experience with guns and knew what she was doing. I submit no one knows what they're doing with a gun when they have a BAC of 0.25, and are totally intoxicated. But you know this. You took me out to your gun training academy. They don't want to call it a club. And after a trial, I had a gun trial. I ended up getting a plea for a client who's facing 3.5 to 15 years in prison of a misdemeanor and probation. And so we celebrated by you teaching me, well, not you, but the individuals that work there teaching me how to shoot. So, of course, I made you take a picture of me shooting the Glock. But I don't know what I'm doing with a gun. In the picture, it does.
Well, you can shoot guns once and not learn. It takes quite a while. It's like anything else. And you should never do it with, obviously, this is stupid to even have to say, but with alcohol. The two just don't mix.
Right.
But we digress a bit. We'll wait and see what happens with this case. There is something strange about it, and I dare say it's not the socialite or the pretty woman thing. The facts don't quite add up as they've been reported. We'll see what comes of it.
There'll be a bail hearing this Wednesday, so we'll find out. I want to talk briefly about Anna Siga Nicolazzi. I didn't know her when I was in the Brooklyn Legal Aid Society. She was a prosecutor there, but she has become somewhat of a high-profile prosecutor. She has a TV show, which is sort of a reality show called True Convictions, I think on the Discovery Network or something to that effect.
We just gave her a plug, which I'm not sure she deserves, but go ahead.
Well, but that she boasts on her TV show that she's never lost a single murder conviction. Out of 35 homicides that she tried, she said, I never lost a single one. And Erin Moriarty, who was on our show 2 weeks ago, had either said to us on the show or in another conversation, I never trust prosecutors that claim to have never lost a trial. And as we're learning now with these post-conviction hearings that she was the prosecutor on, She's come under fire for what appears to be a pattern of prosecutorial misconduct. The cases currently being examined demonstrate repeated instances where she failed to disclose evidence that was favorable to the defense. For example, audio tapes of informants that she was required by law to turn over, she didn't turn over. Information about rewards and inducements made to prosecution witnesses that she was required by law to disclose, she didn't disclose in multiple cases. So we're starting to learn how she
won 35
may have won
trials
35 if this is in fact true.
Look, in somewhat fairness to her, she comes out of an era in the Brooklyn DA's office that has a long and horrid history of withholding exculpatory information and not being sanctioned for it, and wrongful convictions. One of the bureau chiefs there, Michael Vecchione, is reputed to have done this repeatedly, and she seems to have picked up where he left off in terms of not disclosing Brady material in high-profile cases.
Do you think it's intentional?
I think that they're taught badly, that they think that they're doing the right thing. They view the rules as basketball, where they get 5 fouls and 2 big ones, and only if you get caught. And it's just a matter of training, and I don't think they're trained properly. There's too many cases that have come out of Brooklyn that have similar allegations, many of which have been proven to be true, for it not to have some substance of truth to it. So, again, we'll wait and see. The case you're talking about is John Gucca. His attorney is Mark Bedero, who's a great lawyer who's done a great job with this case for years, and I give him a lot of credit. So hopefully we'll follow the case and see what happens with this hearing.
And according to The Independent, she no longer includes her conviction, Guica's conviction in the promotional materials for TV network.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I wouldn't if I was her either. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. Let's take a second to thank one of our sponsors, our very own law firm, Barket, Epstein, Kieran, Aida, and Laturco. I always have to be careful not to forget one of our names. We handle litigation throughout the country, particularly in the metropolitan area. Everything from a straightforward DWI to the most complex federal litigation. You can reach us at 516-745-1500 or go on our website, www.barketepstein.com. And let's move on to the next topic, which is a favorite of yours, or is going to become a favorite of yours.
You know, I actually wrote an editorial comment once to the New York Times just with hopes that it would get published, and it did, and it was about Kevin Cooper. Kevin Cooper has been on death row for almost 40 years, which is unbelievable. In general, if he were guilty, that's unbelievable, but, you know, thank God he's not been executed, because he has an extremely viable case of innocence that's caught the attention of many high-profile individuals, and in particular, Nicholas Kristof of the New York Times. He was convicted of a horrible crime. It was a quadruple homicide in 1983. And I mentioned the race of the victims and of Kevin Cooper because it goes to the issue of the identification and who the perpetrator actually was. But Kevin Cooper is an African-American male. He's now in his 60s. I think he was in his early 20s at the time. The victims were Doug and Peggy Ryan, and their 10-year-old daughter and 11-year-old neighbor were all found murdered, bludgeoned to death. One child, an 8-year-old, Josh, survived. He had his throat slashed and he was left for dead, but he survived. And according to the medical examiner, it is believed that a hatchet, an ice pick, and 1 or 2 knives were used to stab the victims approximately 140 times. And recently, and we'll get into the case of innocence, but recently Governor Newsom issued an executive order directing that evidence be tested for DNA. And this is in contrast to then Attorney General Kamala Harris, who refused to allow any such testing.
Can I comment on that for just a second?
Sure.
It always amazes me and frankly angers me that prosecutors, when confronted with the possibility that they got something wrong, refuse to look at all. They don't just wear blinders. They put a hood over their head and try to put a hood over the head of the justice community at large and won't allow DNA testing. That, to me, is a stunning dereliction of duty. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I agree. What's the harm? What's the potential downside that you actually get to exonerate an innocent person? Here, the evidence overwhelmingly points to his innocence and to the fact that I want to say the fact that he was framed because it hasn't been proven yet, but that he was framed. Josh, the 8-year-old, described the attackers as being a number of white men. Kevin Cooper is black. Hairs found clutched in the victim's hands weren't Cooper's. In fact, none of Cooper's hair were found at the crime scene. No hairs from an African-American man were found at the crime scene. In addition, there was an orange towel that was believed to have been taken from the house and later discarded. They got a DNA profile off of that. It didn't match to anyone that they had a DNA profile of, but it wasn't Cooper's. And there's another suspect that's been lingering around for decades. A witness came forward stating that a longtime suspect in the murders recounted shortly after the murders how he killed the Ryans and Christopher Hughes, which was the 11-year-old neighbor. 2 other witnesses have also said that this same person bragged to them about having murdered an entire family, saying, "We butchered all of them." He happens to be white, and his girlfriend, close in time to the event, told the sheriff that this individual had come home in a car that matched the description of the Ryans' car with bloody overalls, and his hatchet was missing. And the hatchet was likely used in the murder. Police threw out those bloody overalls that she obtained for them without testing them, as they had already jumped to conclusions and arrested Kevin Cooper.
Again, preserve the evidence, test the evidence, follow where the evidence leads. And what police do and prosecutors do, I think, is they don't go out or set out to frame an innocent person. What they end up doing is making a good faith decision about who they think committed the crime, and then in an ends justifying the means manner, go about systematically filtering out anything that doesn't comport with their opinion.
I generally agree with that. Here, it seems to be beyond that because here's more evidence of witness tampering. So at some point, they were able to DNA test a tan shirt that was apparently worn by the murderer. And deputies took a sample of Kevin Cooper's blood after his arrest, and they preserved that using a chemical and put it in a test tube. So Cooper's blood was mysteriously found on this shirt. And when I believe it was defense counsel, tested that blood on the shirt, they found evidence of this chemical in that actual blood sample. And then when they looked to the test tube of Kevin Cooper's blood, it was all but missing. The blood was down to like the very, very, very last drop.
Shades of OJ.
Exactly.
Well, I have a couple questions about that because when was the blood discovered on the shirt? When was it? Was it at the time of the crime, 40 years ago, or was it, relatively speaking, more recently? If it was 40 years ago, I know that you weren't practicing law then, but I was in law school, and DNA didn't really exist the way it does now. In fact, it didn't exist the way it does now. So it would be an odd thing for an officer to plant blood on a shirt, thinking that in 40 years there'd be a technology that would compare the two.
I think the assertion is that it was planted later, but the funny thing about the shirt is they charged Kevin Cooper as responsible for the murders of all 4 people acting alone, despite the kids saying 3 white men were in the house. And 2 T-shirts were allegedly discarded. So what is it? He took 2 T-shirts off? I mean, how many shirts did he wear to the crime scene? And the San Bernardino Sheriff's Office during that time period had a history of misconduct so bad that one of the sheriffs, I don't remember specifically who it was, Floyd Tidwell, the sheriff, was later himself convicted of 4 felony counts for stealing 523 guns. Another lab technician admitted and was prosecuted for stealing heroin from the evidence room. And Williams Richard, who was actually attached to Cooper's investigation, was prosecuted by San Bernardino County in the murder of his wife and sent to prison.
It sounds like a rogues gallery. These are
Not
the police
this guy.
officers.
Sorry, this guy was exonerated. This guy, William, was exonerated. And the leading cause of his wrongful conviction was junk science. And it was revealed that a longtime forensic expert in the sheriff's office had planted the evidence in his case. And this was the same sheriff. This was the same forensic expert who had found the evidence against Cooper.
Oh,
so there, I finally answered your question.
That's fine. That's fascinating. Look, this is a case that we're going to continue to follow and we'll chat about in the weeks to come as the events warrant it.
40 years.
42, I think, or 41 or 42. It's been more than 40 years. So it's been quite a while. This person's been on death row in California. Unbelievable. We're going to take a short break for some commercials and news and weather.
And talk to Ron Kuby, who's our guest, and we're very lucky to have.
Hey, and the Islander fans, hang in there. The Islanders will be on at 7, and we'll give you any score updates.
Radio. I'm Aida Leisenring, and I'm here with Bruce Barket, and we have a special guest.
We do indeed. Those of you who are looking for the Islanders game, it'll be on right after our show. You'll get to be entertained for a few minutes by Ron Kuby, famous civil rights attorney, perhaps the most famous civil rights attorney in New York. Used to work with William Kunstler while William was still alive. Basically picked up where Bill left off. He's represented people like John Gotti, various accused terrorists, one of the shooting victims from Bernard Getz, Colin Ferguson out here on Long Island, and a a whole host of other individuals. Ron, welcome to the show. Thanks for giving us a few minutes.
Thank you so much. And you know, I can't believe that Islanders hockey got pushed back for me. I bet your listeners are having trouble processing that as well, but
They're literally changing the dial right now, going, what's wrong? I'm on the wrong show.
No, this is going to be really traumatic. And let's face it, I've traumatized the white people on Long Island enough over the years. This is probably the last straw.
And that's it. You're kicking an Islanders game.
It,
so,
right.
So in honor of Pride Month, and I'll give him a nod to somebody who's very close to me, who has recently discovered her sexuality. Tell us about the time that you got into a fist fight in defense of gay pride and against homophobes in New York City.
Okay, well, I'm going to try to make it a short story, but it was kind of fun, but for the broken nose. So anyway, I'm walking out of my office on 23rd Street in Chelsea, heading home to my home on 23rd Street in Chelsea, and there's this group of 4 people walking down the street, and one of them is female screaming homophobic slurs at the top of her lungs at everybody. And
you punched her?
No, he got his butt kicked by a girl.
No, I did. Just you know what? Do you want me to tell the story? Huh?
Go ahead. Sorry.
I didn't get my butt kicked by a girl. I mean, I can't. Anyway, so she's screaming homophobic slurs, and she's with another couple. They're African American, and she's got a large African American boyfriend, and so she's feeling quite comfortable walking through white gay Chelsea, screaming homophobic slurs, thinking that she's got 2 big black guys here, and all us white people are terrified of big black guys. But I'm not really. I mean, any more than I'm terrified of anybody else. So I sort of politely, given the fact that I had consumed a couple of adult beverages, asked her to stop doing this. Whereupon she took great umbrage and grabbed me by the ponytail.
That seems unfair.
That's your Achilles heel.
Began smacking me in the face.
Wow.
Yeah, and so it's like, okay, this is, and again, I've had like 3 stereotypes already. I'll do one more. The phrase hits like a girl, I mean, that does have some resonance in historical experience. I mean, it's not true of Ronda Rousey, obviously, but it was still unsustainable. I mean, I can't have this woman hanging on my ponytail and repeatedly hitting me in the face.
Right.
So.
It's like the assault rifle of bitch slapping.
Yeah.
That's how women hit.
Yeah. Well, so I gently but firmly tap her on the chin with my non-dominant fist, which is my left, and that has the desired effect of getting her to let go and back off in shock and horror, and it has the predictable but undesired effect of having her boyfriend, as I turn to face him, I know it's coming, but I'm not fast enough. Boom!
And
right in the nose.
That's the broken nose.
Yeah, it's the broken, right in the nose, and I go down, and, if you ever had your nose broken, it just bleeds and bleeds and bleeds, and I'm like lying there on 23rd and 8th Avenue, on the other side of the wrong side of the curb with my nose broken, and I was like, nah, I'm not, this is not the way anybody's going to walk away from me, so I got up and threw a punch, not terribly effectively, and at that point, the guy's friends said, let's get out of here. But while my dear comrades in Chelsea are not very good at intervening in fights, they are excellent. They're excellent at doing what, Bruce?
Calling the police?
Yes!
Yes! How do I know?
Yeah, so they didn't get very far, and they were swarmed by cops, and I went home and had another adult beverage.
Were you a cooperative witness, or did you say, I don't care?
I was cooperative in the sense of when the prosecutor told me they were intending to offer him disorderly conduct, so he doesn't have a criminal record. He's a young kid, obviously showing off for a girl.
The story gets worse. It was like from, two giant men and a loudmouth woman to teenagers?
Well, in his 20s.
Okay.
I
don't want to get hit by anybody in their 20s.
No, that's
true.
Look,
I don't want to give the guy a criminal record, so I consented to the discon. Right. And then he told the New York Post that he had no idea he was beating up a publicity-seeking lawyer. He thought that he was beating up a homeless guy.
He should have told that to his lawyer. That's a defense, isn't it?
Right. Obviously, he didn't learn his lesson.
Well, so going from that exoneration of sorts, right? You got him a reduced charge to real exonerations from the likes of Louis Scarcella. You represented Shabaka Shakur. Did I say that correctly?
Right, yeah, Shabaka Shakur. He was actually my first Scarcella exoneree. I think it was back in 2015. I've had a bunch of them since then.
How many wrongful convictions is Scarcella responsible for? I mean, we'll never know the number, but in terms of...
he's been outed for. Forgive the use of that phrase this month.
Yeah, outed for. That's good. The number is unclear because most of, Louis Scarcella, homicide detective, most of the people that he arrested who got indicted for homicides ended up pleading guilty, often to reduce charges, but they ended up pleading guilty, and those cases are almost impossible to reopen.
Right. Roughly
2/3 of his arrests ended in guilty pleas. In that era, only a third went to trial, and that was a pretty high number.
A huge number.
To have a third go to trial just because everybody knew he was so corrupt.
But you were one of the first cases that sort of opened up this whole world to his misconduct that ended up resulting in at least 8 to 13 exonerations afterwards.
Yep. And that was really largely due to my client, who was formed along with Derek Hamilton, another Scarcella exoneree, and Danny Rincon, who's not yet been exonerated. They formed their own little actual innocence group while in prison. And they were pretty good jailhouse lawyers, and people kept coming up to them saying, hey, will you read my papers? Will you read my papers? And they began to notice that Detective Louis Scarcella was involved in lots of cases. And it was really Hamilton and Shabaka Shakur who put it all together. Shabaka put it all in his motion, which I got in 2012 before the Scarcella thing blew up and agreed to take. And then the rest, of course, we all know very well. It was actually kind of funny because, I mean, at this point, Scarcella is described as disgraced Detective Louis Scarcella. Disgraced is now his first name.
Right.
But I had him on the witness stand a couple years ago, and, I've known him for a long time. And so I said, we've known each other for quite some time. Isn't that right, Detective? He said, yes. And I said, how long has it been? He said, it's been a long time. I don't really remember. I said, it's been so long, we met when you were the hero, and I was the bad guy, right?
Did you actually say that to him?
Yeah, I did. It's actually in the transcript. the sociopath that he is, he laughed.
That's cool. He gets the joke, right? Because to him, it's all one big joke. So, what do you think? I mean, we handle these cases from time to time. So many questions about it. One is, how do you pick your clients other than that they can pay, right? Beyond that, because none of these guys could pay you initially, I'm sure.
My clients pay?
They're supposed to, aren't they?
When?
I don't know. Some of our clients pay occasionally.
We're a not-for-payment office.
Right. We're going to refer all those clients to you.
And now I know what to do with all the letters our office gets, right? Forward them on to the...
Yeah, no, 90% of our work is entirely pro bono in terms of hours spent per year.
But
how many letters do you get? Don't you get letters from inmates in prison saying, please help me with the case?
I get lots of them. And we really try to be responsive and responsible and answer them in a timely fashion. They do have a tendency to pile up. How do you pick
the wheat from the chaff?
Well, if you're talking about actual innocence cases, that's more of an art than any sort of a science. First of all, people who have been in prison for 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years, they don't have any money.
Right.
Right. Everything they had, it's like, Bruce, you know this. Hey, I paid my first lawyer $250,000 and he blew my trial. I paid my appeals lawyer $150,000.
I'm laughing because we've all heard this.
Now
right?
I'm broke. Will you take my case?
Please take my case because I'm broke and I spent all this money on lousy lawyers before I met you.
Right. So as a result, you have to be careful. So I look for the kinds of markers that you see in wrongful conviction cases. Bad identification practice, bad cops involved, single witness identifications, no corroborating physical or forensic evidence of any kind, whether the defendant, in fact has some sort of an alibi, however bad it looked back when he got arrested. And like everybody else, I look at prior arrest history. I mean, if you've been convicted 8 times in a narcotics offense and you're telling me you're innocent of the 9th, I do look at that, with a more jaundiced eye than I would, a virgin arrestee.
How about not just the wrongful conviction cases, but you've represented John Gotti, terrorists. One of the guys who was shot by Bernard
alleged terrorist.
Bruce.
But I mean, how do you decide? I'll do this. I'll do this civil rights case, and I'll represent this guy who tried to blow up the World Trade Centers.
Okay.
And John Gotti. And go ahead.
Let's pretend we got a guy, right, who's very ideologically committed to.
I know what you're going to say.
Anti-abortion, and he's not only implicated in abortion clinic bombings, but he actually stashes dynamite, within like 300 feet of a school or something.
Sounds familiar.
I can't imagine that.
A terrorist, Bruce, or would you call him your former client?
I would call him
pro-life Bruce Barket defending the doctor shooter.
Former client. But we know how I picked that client, right? We know how I picked that client. And by the way, I'm against blowing things up almost entirely. I'm against shooting people almost entirely.
It's a new disclaimer we have to play before the show.
I'm not in favor of bombing anything in the United States, even abortion facilities. I'm not in favor of shooting doctors. We'll say that up front. But
so you're doing great, Bruce.
I'm doing good. Excellent. So
handsomely here on your show.
So terrorists, alleged terrorists, John Gotti and Colin Ferguson.
So look,
how do we pick these guys?
A lot of the so-called terrorism cases, and it's a broad brush, really. These are people that I have a lot of political sympathy for. I think they were doing the right. Their cause was the right cause. They got a little too frisky in methodology, but they are being over-criminalized and over-punished in ways that other people who committed similar acts would not be so criminalized and punished. But clearly I take up those clients because either A, have tremendous sympathy for the cause, or B, I think that their civil rights are just being annihilated because everybody hates him so much. John Gotti, I didn't do much repping of the father. I represented John the Younger a bit in some of his trials. Kunstler and John Gotti were friends. They respected each other in what the others did. So I kind of inherited the extended Gotti family when Bill died, and remain on good terms with them. As should you.
As should everybody. Right?
As should you. And Aida, whatever her name is, might want to say a good thing about him, too. All right?
So, one
Chooch.
And so that Gotti, why one of the persons or men who was shot by Bernard Goetz?
Well, that was, now we're going way, way back.
Right. Like, I actually remember that case, not because I'm old enough to remember it, but because I studied it in law school.
Right.
Now I'm aging both of you. I studied your cases, guys. But, for any listener that doesn't know, describe briefly what the case entailed.
Well, it's an interesting thing to ask that question because the case entailed two versions. One is the truthful version, and the other was the version that captured the political imagination and the white supremacist fear of crime. The actual version is that a deeply disturbed human being named Bernard Goetz, who walked around with an illegal handgun with him all of the time because he felt the police did not pay sufficient attention to some encounter he had had years ago where he allegedly suffered an injury, always walked around with a handgun, gets on board a subway station a few days before Christmas in 1984, I think, 4 or 5, my memory. And one young man walks up to him and asks him for $5. At that point, Bernard Goetz pulls out his gun, shoots the young man who asked for $5 in the chest. Another fellow who is with him turns but gets shot in the back. A third guy gets shot, and my client, who didn't speak to Goetz, didn't acknowledge Goetz, had no interaction with Goetz, gets shot at, but not shot. Whereupon Bernard Goetz inspects each of his victims and looks at my client and says, "You don't look so bad. Here's another," and fires the fifth and final shot from his Smith & Wesson directly in my client's spine, paralyzing him forever. And sending. So that and then disappears into the night, only to be captured a month later. That's what actually happened.
And he got acquitted.
Yeah, because the version of the Goetz story, which people really wanted, including people who really know better, Bruce, but the demagogic politicians couldn't help themselves. They decided to portray him as Charles Bronson, Mr. Everyman, set upon by muggers wielding sharpened screwdrivers out of nowhere.
Battered men syndrome.
Leaves 4 on the ground and rides off on a white horse, with a tiki torch and, a red and black swastika, I don't know. And he became a hero in New York City. He was every working class, angry, bitter white person's answer to a rise in crime. And it really, in many ways, his deification and his acquittal sort of set the stage for the era of police brutality, mass arrests, and mass incarceration that followed in the 80s and the 90s, with all of the fallout we see now.
Really, it's his fault all along.
Well, it was
the politicians and the demagogues.
Right.
It was our fault.
Right.
We allowed it to happen. We made him into this hero. We, instead of condemning the vigilantism, people embraced it and embraced a very racist narrative that we in a liberal New York City carried forward for a generation.
And so what's remarkable is you took on the case of the young man who is paralyzed for life to sue Bernard Goetz. And you took that case knowing that you would never get a dime for it, and that really the client, even if you won the case, would not collect a dime. And what was the ultimate judgment that you got for the case?
I think we won $45 million.
Excellent.
Okay.
Excellent.
Plus 9% interest a year, Bruce.
9%, right, exactly.
Right. So, you let that sit for a while, it really grows. Yeah, we never collected a dime. We never expected to. That was never the idea behind it. The idea behind it was to put Bernard Goetz on trial in front of a non-white audience. I remember at his jury, it just so happened that 10 out of the 12 jurors were white. And so when we tried the case in the Bronx, we got a very, very different outcome, simply pointing out, of course, that black people and white people saw the case in very, very different ways.
Well, that's
extraordinary.
Extraordinary, but we don't have much time left. But I want you to comment on your views of race in the judicial system. If you can do that in
10 seconds,
30 seconds or less.
The judicial system was created as a way of, among other things, policing the lives of black people and the underclass generally, who often are African American, but not exclusively. It is structurally and systematically racist. It has been since its inception, and it continues to be today, despite some reforms and some attempts to come to grips with the horror that we have wrought on the lives of so many people.
Unbelievable.
How's that?
That was excellent, and it was within the time frame. Ron, thanks so much for coming on. Easy to see why you were a radio star yourself.
Easy to see why they decided to cancel the Islanders for you.
Exactly.
Right. Easy to see why I got fired multiple times, and easy to see why your remaining audience of tens and tens will be sitting there waiting for the Islanders.
And they'll have them in very short order. Thanks a lot. And
take care, comrades.
See ya.
Thank you.
Don't forget to visit us at www.barketepstein.com. Look at our profiles and go on Instagram and see photos of Crime and Justice Radio at Crime and Justice Radio.
Good evening, everyone, and join us next week. We still are waiting for our guest.
We're going to have an outstanding guest next week.
It's going to be an amazing guest.
Could be really, really good. We'll have her on at one point. And one last nod to our friends for Pride Month. We'll talk to you again soon. Take care.
The views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of this station, JVC Broadcasting Management, or its sponsors. And or its sponsors.